Hello, welcome back to See What Sticks, a podcast in tandem with Hollywood Casting and Film. I'm Russell.
I'm
I'm Matt.
Arianna.
Vinay, Arianna, Max, and Olivia.
There we go.
Okay.
So, our topic today is going to be a little different than our last few. Today, we're going to talk about some of our favorite clips and moments from cinema, just because we thought it'd be something fun, interesting, a little different. So, I'll use mine last since I'm the host. So, whoever wants to take it away, take it.
Okay, I'll start. The first clip I chose was from the movie Broadcast News. And I have to first start out and say that it's probably my favorite movie. Everyone's got a movie that they put on, before they go to bed or, they're folding laundry or whatever. And that's the movie for me. Not only is the dialogue great, but I think that Holly Hunter's performance in that movie it makes the whole movie because have you guys seen it? Yeah. I think it came out. It was pretty prescient because it came out right before the explosion of cable news. But I guess that we could sort of see media that connection. And so, Holly Hunter's character, she plays this reporter that is supposedly, upright, upstanding. She doesn't fall for the media games and, sensationalism. But the movie itself, I think, is an allegory of society because the character that she plays represents the struggle that society's going through, this grand struggle between substance and style. And her performance is so critical because we have to believe that she's, able to be seduced by, the temptations of sensationalizing news. And I feel like that performance could have gone wrong in so many ways. If she was a little too confident, she would have been like Aaron Brockovich or something. Or if she was a little too persnickety, it would have been like, Tracy Flick in Election. So I love those roles where the actor just has to kind of hit the right note and they do it perfectly. And I feel like a lot of Brooks's movies are like that. So that's why I chose that particular clip.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, I actually really like that movie. And when that was sent in the group chat when we were talking about all this, I was a little surprised. I was very curious as to what Vinay would pick as his favorite scenes. And in my own head, I'm like, this could be anything. Like, I would not be surprised if any film came in this roster. So, no, that's a solid pick. And it's something that I think was a bit unexpected for me. Who wants to go next?
I guess I can go next. So for the performance, the one that I picked was Marlon Brando in Godfather, which is probably one of the most iconic performances in movie history. I mean, people can quote it without having seen the movie. So when it gets to that level, that it's pretty good. So I guess there's a lot to say about it just because it's kind of gone through time and a lot of people have looked at it like that. So for me, the most compelling factor is that it's just so believable the way he plays him. I think a key part of an actor taking on a role and making the audience feel connected to them is being genuine and being, whether that's you're angry or that's you're a bad guy or you're a good guy, just being genuine and making them believe you can be that person. And I think that Marlon Brando's performance tackles that quite well.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I think that performance is one of those ones that it's become its own like caricature in other things. And I think that's how you know something is good, when it's part of just like culture to such like a core degree. When someone does that like Don Corleone impression, you know what that is.
Right.
And I think that's a really interesting one. And I think if you're picking a movie like that or any film with that kind of cultural impact of a performance, you can pick any line from that movie and someone will know what it is or be a fan.
For me personally, it was hard to appreciate the performance because I don't think I saw the movie until I was like 35 or something. But all throughout high school, college, I'd seen stand-up comics, perform the impression, people perform the impression at parties. And so when I first saw the movie, the performance itself, I couldn't divorce it from all the impressions that I'd seen throughout the years. But I guess if you step back and you can erase your memory, you begin to appreciate what an original choices he made during the movie. I guess it's almost like Nicolas Cage, where he'll just make like bizarre acting choices. I kind of feel that way about Brando in Godfather.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I think, Nicolas Cage is one of those people. I think it's funny because right now in our culture, Nicolas Cage is kind of like this weird joke, anti kind of joke character, but he's won an Academy Award. Like, he's a legitimately good actor who's just a goofball. So right. I think that's really interesting when you tell people that who may not know that. You're like, yeah, he's an Academy Award winner, and people's minds are blown.
Right.
I think it's an interesting point to talk about that, though, because a lot of the times when you watch old movies, you have to remember that like, now it's a pun, now it's like an overused trope, but at the time it wasn't. And that's like one of the hardest things when you sit down and watch an old movie, like, okay, remember what time you're in, where it takes place, and all that stuff.
Definitely. I think, that's a good point when you're showing or watching an old movie or seeing something that's so replicated that you're like, oh, it's just this. But you have to remember, like, oh, this is the first time they did that. And that's why it's famous. Like yesterday, I was watching Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, and there's a bunch of moments in there that they hadn't done that before. Like the tank scene at the end with that, like, where Harrison Ford's hanging off the tank. They've redone that in a lot of other movies. And of course, it's not the first movie to ever do a fight scene with horses and tanks. Like Lawrence of Arabia had stuff like that. But the way Harrison Ford did all those stunts, or most of them, it's like, wow, that's crazy that they actually pulled this off for this film, and so many other films want to do that exact thing.
Right.
Yeah. So, Olivia, since you went, what's your, first pick?
So for the best performance, I did the no scene in Get Out, because it was like, Jordan Peele does such an amazing job with just cinematography, like the makeup department, the production, and all that stuff. And with that specific scene with her performance, to have to be both extremely happy, but at the same time show help me eyes without it being cheesy or anything and then the camera's just so close to her to make you feel claustrophobic. It helps it a lot. But I just think that that's so impressive for an actress to literally have to show fear and at the same time look, willing and ready to serve at the same time.
Yeah.
I love that movie. The thing that struck me about Get Out is that it seemed that it was a movie that used silence in a really intriguing way. It was almost like an old Hitchcock film where the camera just kind of floats on a character or on a scene, and that in itself makes you anxious. And I had not really seen that in modern cinema. I saw it in a lot of Hitchcock films. I saw it in some, verite stuff. But I think that's, for me, why I love that movie and that performance as well.
One thing I love about that movie is it's kind of this trend that's been going on where I guess classically comedic filmmakers are making scary movies. And it happened with Jordan Peele, and it happened with John Krasinski with A Quiet Place, and
Chris Rock is doing Saw.
Yeah, Chris Rock is doing Saw. Who did Halloween, the remake Halloween? That was another comedian.
Yeah, it was a comedian. I think that's there's a big crossover between comedy and horror. My senior year at Purdue, I wrote a paper that made a bunch of people upset. It's how country and hip hop are the two closest genres to each other, just based on what their topics are and based on some of the issues both genres have. But I think horror and comedy are the same way. They're so close to each other, but people who love one of them or the other hate the other side. And I think it's super funny where genres are that close, but their topics or the way they present their topics are so different.
Well,
they're very niche.
But thematically, they're similar, I think.
Yeah. And
like you have to time a joke and you have to time that joke, you have to time that scare, where it's not as much about like these grandiose monologues and performances. It's all about like timing and like making sure you like feel every like movement instead of like making it more performance based.
For sure. And going back to Vinay's film, Vinay, have you seen the movie Bombshell from 2019 about like Fox News?
I did. I sure did. Yeah.
Yeah. When you were talking about yours, I forgot the name. I had to look it up. And that it reminds me of that a lot, where it talks about the media and it talks about this inside look in, you know, what you see on TV. Obviously, I think we all know is dramatized, even though you're trying to present facts.
Yeah.
But it just shows like how warped things can get and how warped things do get, and how people, it's that same idea of like history is written by the winners.
Right.
And it's written by a certain group of people, but that doesn't mean that's objectively what happened. Right. And watching that in Bombshell are like, oh, wow. And it really makes you like, whenever you turn on the TV again to watch news or read an article or anything, you're like, maybe I should read 2 or 3 articles from opposite sides to see what's in common and what's not, because you have to like trim off all the like excess like rhetoric from it.
Yeah, well, and I like Bombshell, and that director, I think Jay Roach, is the one that did the Sarah Palin movie on HBO, and I kind of see that as a separate genre of, you know, fact-based comedy, political comedy, but I think with movies like Broadcast News, they're topical, but they use the characters themselves as an allegory to make their point rather than, you know, kind of make an overt political point. And I think that a lot of that sort of subtlety in writing has been lost in the past 10 or 15 years. You know, now it's everyone's kind of in your face and making a statement, whereas before I felt like the characters people wrote in movies were a little more allegorical, and the subtext was pretty subtle. Now it just seems dramatic every time you see a certain point.
Yeah, there's no subtlety. I think that's like it's like a joke. I think on the internet when you're looking up any like movie review, people are like, it's either the best movie that's ever been created or it is the worst movie that's ever been created. There's no nuance. There's like people are like, I love it or I hate it, and I'm like, you can like things in a bad movie or hate things in a great movie, and I think we forget that a lot. Especially now, talking about movies or TV or anything, it's either yes or no. There's no, well, here's a point.
Right.
But yeah, Arianna, you haven't talked a bunch. What's your pick?
It kind of goes off Max's, but it's a completely different movie. It's Goodfellas, and I picked the iconic Copacabana Steadicam shot.
Yeah.
It is a scene that you study in film school because you're learning how to do the one-shot take. But I think that it is a movie within another movie. Because it's showing you the life, what it is to be in the mafia. So Karen is going on a date with Henry Hill. So she's being taken into the world. Yeah. So by her seeing Henry give the guy $20 to watch the car, going into the restaurant from the kitchen, seeing how everybody in the kitchen reacts to him coming in. And then they go up to the little VIP section instead of just walking in like everybody else to the front door.
Yeah.
It gives you a little idea of how the mafia works and what it looks like if you are in that world.
For sure. And that scene, rewatching that yesterday, I think it's really funny. Like when I watched that before when I was younger or when I was like in school, I was like, oh, that's super cool. Like that's cool that they pulled that off. But now working on projects all the time, just watching that gave me an anxiety attack. I'm like, oh my God, how did they orchestrate that? Because that's probably the 100th take of that scene.
Yeah.
Like, or maybe it was the first one they nailed it, but Martin Scorsese probably did 1,000 more takes of that. And I'm like, oh my God. Like if one person trips, you have to redo the entire thing, reset all of it, go back to the top. And yeah, that's one of those sequences that the acting is secondary to the camera's filmmaking. Like the actors are just kind of puppets that are like on rails. It's like an amusement park ride. Yeah. And then it's so different Like the movie Birdman, I think is like the same way, or like 1917, where the whole film looks like one take. Like the actors are important, obviously, but it's just like you're looking, you're like, oh my God, how did they pull this off?
The amazing thing for me in that scene in particular is, I believe Goodfellas came out, was it 1990 or 91? It was in that time frame, right? And and then by 1997, the movie Swingers comes out, and that particular scene had become so iconic that they parodied that scene in the movie Swingers. And I can't think of another scene that sort of gained that mythic status in just 6 years after it was being shot. I remember talking about it in 94, 95 as this thing. And, do you guys think it sort of changed cinematography and the way people shoot things? Because I remember, there was that Nick Cage movie, Snake Eyes, and the whole gimmick was it was one take. And then when the show The West Wing was big, they had a lot of those scenes in the show.
In The West Wing, I remember there's like a I guess you could call it like a doghouse where there's all the press secretary and all the press members, and it's got like these doorways, and the camera's just weaving in and out of people and in doorways. And watching it now it's incredible how they got it. And I think the biggest part, you asked if it should change filmmaking. I think it just took the challenge of taking the long shot and just made it really, really good. Where it's something that's so hard to do, and people who make movies know that. And then he just took it and made it great.
Yeah. And the ironic thing is that scene may have been, as artistic as it was, they may have been just solving a functional problem, because I know that movie was based on a book. And I know when you're reading a book with that many colorful characters, you've got to figure out a way how to squeeze them into your movie. And I wonder how much of that played a role in structuring the scene versus there's the element of introducing Karen into the new world of the mafia, which is iconic in itself, but it's, I'm sure that there were some practical considerations that went into that and staging that as well.
I actually remember reading an article when I was studying it. I studied it in school, and then I just loved the movie. The guy said in the book Wise Guys, that scene is, I think, 40 words long in a sentence. So Martin Scorsese read that and then was like, okay, here's what I can do with it.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah. So I guess going on that, my pick is also from a book. So it's from my favorite movie, my favorite movie series, but I think it's my favorite of the three. But it's from Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. I guess the interesting part of it is the scene I picked. I actually have a tattoo of that quote of all we have to decide is what to do with the time that's given to us. And I think in the book, it's interesting because that line that Gandalf gives Frodo is, they talk about it when Frodo first finds the ring and they put it in the fire in the fireplace. Mm-hmm. And Gandalf gives it back to Frodo. And then he kind of says that because Frodo's like, I don't want this thing. But I think in the movie, they moved it later to when they're in Moria, because Frodo's already this is a bad idea. We're in a cave, and this has gone way farther than I anticipated. And Frodo has this whole thing where he's like, they should have killed Gollum in the first place. And Gandalf is like, you're not completely wrong, but you don't have it in you to say that. Because I think throughout the entire film series, Frodo, I think, only kills one goblin, or if anything. It's a surprisingly low number that he ever kills. And I think Sam maybe kills 5 or 6 compared to the rest of the ensemble cast, who are kind of killing machines, who are going through to help Frodo and Sam on their path. And I think it's really interesting that in a lot of movies that your protagonist character, the one who's this chosen one sort of idea, is let's do this. And then Frodo's I don't want to have to do this. And I think it's applicable to a lot of things. And part of the reason I have the tattoo, which I'm not going to get into on this, but I think whenever something's handed to you in life, or you have a difficult situation, it's how you handle the situation, not the situation itself, that'll define you. And I think that moment, especially with acting with eyes, like Olivia was talking about, Sir Ian McKellen crushes that scene where he's fatherly, but also being stern, but also being like very comforting to be like, hey, yeah, we all have gone through this. It's not going to be fun, but I know you're strong enough to handle it. And with Suri and McKellen being that good, I've always been shocked that he turned down. I mean, I get why he turned down Dumbledore to Gandalf. And I think Suri and McKellen would have been really good as Dumbledore. Not that Sir Richard Harris or Michael Gambon weren't good, but they're kind of like sad and old, where Ian McKellen is like this jovial old guy. And like Dumbledore in the books for Harry Potter is very jovial. And he's very like nice and fun, where in the movies for Harry Potter, Dumbledore's just kind of sad and bums you out. He's just like this sad old guy who's like really powerful, but he's just bummed. And I think rewatching Lord of the Rings, as I do a few times a year, I notice that more and more how like nuanced all of those performances are, because you have a film with 9 people in a fellowship plus a million other side characters, and each of them, if people have seen the movie, which I'm guessing most people have seen Lord of the Rings, they remember each character, and people have a fondness for specific characters where they only may have 7 or 8 lines. Like Legolas only has 3 lines he ever says to Frodo in the entire film series. And he says, "and my bow." When they're like, "I'll help you." That's all Legolas says to Frodo the entire like series. But there's like, you remember these interactions, and I think that's what makes those films like so great, and that scene kind of what those films are really about. So yeah, that's why I picked that.
All right. And did you guys have some other scenes as well? I
know Vinay had some. I actually had 2 more. One other one's from Lord of the Rings, so I won't talk about that one. But I had a second. If you guys want to go through your second one as well, because mine, there's no dialogue in my second one. It's like a montage.
Oh, okay. So I guess I'll go next. The second one I chose was from the movie Sideways. And I love that scene. I actually remember being in the theater watching that movie in 2004, I believe. And I felt this when I watched it too, but what struck me as interesting was that we hadn't really seen that sort of interaction on film before, like typically when you saw a man pursuing a woman or a woman pursuing a man in film, it was either the college, frat house vibe, or, everyone was middle-aged and they were kind of, meeting each other on top of the Empire State Building to fall in love, New Year's Eve. And I remember that scene feeling like it was like the first realistic scene I'd seen about, dating, for middle-aged people. And also it also struck me as almost like a short story on screen. And I guess that makes sense. It's another book adaptation. But I felt like that particular style of filmmaking has, changed cinema for the better, for the largest part. It kind of opened the door for the idea of character study being a thing in cinema. Whereas before, I think when people did character study, it was, in experimental film or in films you'd see in Soho or whatever. So that's what struck me with that scene that I liked a lot.
Yeah, I think that movie's really interesting. That's something that's a movie my dad showed me. And yeah. I think it goes into like 3 categories of film I have. Maybe Max and Olivia and Arianna also have it, and you, Vinay. There's like there's the category of movies I watched because I figured it out or a friend told me. Movies I had to watch because of film school, and then movies my dad showed me. Or movies more like my dad's like, watch this with me. He's like, this is important for you to see, like The Graduate and stuff, where he's like, watch this thing. He's like, you'll thank me later. And those are like the categories of film in my head that I have. And I think Max smiled when I said the movies I had to watch because of film school. And I think that this movie doesn't fall into that, but it's close. It's almost it's film school. So you know what it is. Yeah. And it's in that category of like the ultimate dad movies. Like there's like a series of if Kevin Costner's in it, it's probably a dad movie. And it's like Dances with Wolves. Everyone's dad made them watch it. It's like 6 hours long. And I think it's similar where it's an important film, like you're saying, and it's a different kind of character study. And I think it's interesting for us to see it now. And like we were saying, look back and be like, wow, this is different. But now we don't look at it that way, but you have to put yourself in that time.
Yeah. Well, I think what the interesting thing about this entire discussion is so many of us have chosen movies or scenes that were originally in novels. And maybe one reason is whenever the filmmaker begins to adapt a book, they don't really have to worry so much about developing a character in a very nuanced way, because I tend to think that a lot of screenwriters sort of clumsily develop their characters, or, something dramatic happens at the beginning that kind of smacks you over the face, rather than with, like, say, Alexander Payne or a lot of these filmmakers that write book adaptations. The characters seem more like a well-worn shoe. They seem a little more lived in, and maybe that's what's indelible about all the movies we're talking about, is remember those little ticks and quirks of characters that that gave a memorable performance.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, with a lot of films that we're looking at, I think the big exception in this one, is Get Out, where it does do character development very interestingly, like a novel. Where I think if you show people that movie 30 years from now, and you're like, oh yeah, this guy just wrote this and made this into a movie, people would have thought that's based on a book because of how special and nuanced it is, and why I think we've all picked stuff that are based on pre-existing source material is because the heavy lifting on characters are gone. So the filmmaking has to be really kind of this top-notch, different kind of style that I think we appreciate. And I think the only other film that I can think of that really does that, where you're like, wow, this isn't based on another thing that I can think of, that I guess two would be The Shape of Water, which do character development super well. But I guess it's essentially Beauty and the Beast, but with a fish. And then Birdman, or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, that one, where it's essentially a stage play, but it doesn't stop. And it's like the character development is really real because there's no exposition. It's just people talking at each other, not really with each other. And I think that's a lot of our conversations, especially when we're stressed. And for like actors listening to this, if you've ever worked with like me or someone else on set and then off of set, where I'll talk more like this off of set, but on set, you're sort of talking at each other because there's this level of stress and you just need your point to get across in the least number of words possible. And I think that movie, and as well as the scene in Goodfellas, is like that. It's just, you're not talking to have a conversation. You're talking just to get a point. That's all you want. You're like, I want to be there.
Yeah.
And you'll say the least amount of words like needed to do it. And so I think it's really interesting, like looking at these scenes. Max, do you, or Olivia, do you have a second scene you want to talk about in the last like 8 minutes and 23 seconds?
Yeah, I do. The other one I wanted to talk about was from the original Halloween from 1978. This would be in the category of movies my dad showed me. And this is one I could watch over and over again. I love that movie. But there's a scene in the beginning. The movie starts, and it's Michael Myers' house. And the way they filmed it is that it was on a shoestring budget. So they only redid the house is destroyed. It's super old and dilapidated. So they only redid certain portions of it. So the camera movements had to be very precise in order to only show the pieces that they fixed. And they called it the panic glide. So it was this big chassis that the cinematographer wore on his body, so to make the camera movements as smooth as possible. And he had to be so precise with it. And then learning how they made that shot, it was very impressive, especially with that budget they had to work with, which is basically nothing.
Yeah, those kind of movies, I think those are the scariest. Like that, like watching that, it reminds me, I don't know if any of you have seen the movie called The Babadook, which reminds me of like, where it's a movie made for like no money, but it's absolutely horrifying because it's just a dude in makeup running around and scaring you. It's a lot like Halloween, where it's just a dude in a mask running around scaring you. And I think that's like the joke that I always have is when I watch like horror movies or anything. It's things that aren't real, like Alien or like The Thing, stuff like that, don't scare me because it's like otherworldly, like oogly booglies. But something that's very real and tangible, like even like the Babadook or like Friday the 13th, Halloween, that stuff's horrifying to me because home invasion scares me so much. That's like, that will chill me to my core. But yeah, I like that pick a lot. Olivia or Arianna, do you have another one?
Yeah, I have. It actually kind of balances out with that. The movie's called Tigers Are Not Afraid, and it's this Mexican filmmaker. Her name's Issa Lopez, and the scene that I was like doing was when she's running away from the biggest part of the style is magical realism. So you're not entirely sure if it's just because it's the point of view of a child that all these things are happening, or if they're actually like magical things happening. And she's running away from like this like horde of like zombies essentially. And it's very much like starts with her like getting trapped, kind of showing how she's trapped, then kind of starts kind of going in slowly to create that claustrophobic feeling. And I think what I really liked about that movie was just that in general it commented on like a bigger sense of like problems that were happening that Issa Lopez wanted to comment on, but made it a little bit more interesting with that magical realism. And the whole movie is based off of the fact that she has 3 wishes and that her mom has disappeared and she's been trying to find her mom. And since now she's an orphan, she like runs around with a bunch of other orphans. I would definitely recommend watching it. It's in Spanish, but subtitles are fine.
That sounds fascinating. I think one of my favorite on like Spanish films, one of my favorite films of all time is in Spanish, Pan's Labyrinth. So that does not bother me watching a movie in like a foreign language to my like what I've seen on Spanish films, or I guess this is a Mexican film by Alejandro Iñárritu. It's his first film. It's Amores Perros. Have you seen that?
No.
That movie is so hard to get through. Vinay, I recommend you watch that, but you should probably bring like a box of tissues with you and maybe a bowl of soup, because afterwards you're gonna just want to like sit in the shower and be like, oh my god, there's
watch
no
a
like
G movie watch like a G movie right after.
Yeah, you should watch like Madagascar afterwards, or like Toy Story, because you're not gonna want to. It's so dark, but I think it's one of the best movies. It's sort of like Crash style, where it's a bunch of different perspectives. They all tie together on one thing, but no character is likable. Everyone is absolutely the worst. But that's kind of how life is. Some people are just the worst. And I guess we'll close up. My final one is a scene that I think everyone should just watch. It's from Master and Commander, which is like the ultimate dad movie. They built a bunch of boats for the movie, and apparently it's one of the most historically accurate films of all time, just based on how like even like the rigging of the ships are. As an ex-sailor, I like geek out on it. But the scene is where Russell Crowe is playing the violin, and it's really beautiful. It's just a really good montage of him like just kind of relaxing, playing the violin, juxtaposed with all the hecticness that happens on a warship in like the 16 or 1700s. And the film is about a British ship chasing a Spanish and French ship, and it's just what happens. And then there's this whole subplot about finding the Galapagos Islands, which is really cool. But it is fantastic. Everyone should watch it. But before we close, thank you so much for Arianna, Max, Olivia, and Vinay for coming on this episode. And for everyone on Mighty Networks who listens to this as well, please vote on our like next topics. We'll put those out every so often because it's cool kind of having a crowdsourced thing and it gets everyone involved. But in our last 2 minutes, is there any closing points?
I'll just say that I think that the emergence of prestige TV, I guess starting with The Sopranos and going all the way to Breaking Bad, one of the reasons why I think Get Out was so successful was because prestige TV, it made us expect more with storytelling. Now a successful movie, it's not just a comedy or a drama or a thriller or horror. I think we expect elements of everything in a movie, and I think the Jordan Peele script for Get Out, it was, like a superior version of like an M. Night Shyamalan movie or something, because it's funnier, it was, more intriguing. And so I think that just TV in general has has kind of forced movies to sort of up their game in a way. And it's something that we see manifest in movies like Get Out.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's perfectly said. And thank you, TV, for making movies better, because that's good. And yeah, I'm excited to see where films go and TV goes because of this. And great discussion, everybody. And we will catch you next week for the next episode. Have a great day.